Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Welcome again. I'm back. And as I said earlier, we're going to have our speaker, I'll introduce him in a minute. But before we do that, we usually go around and say our names. And during that, we like to have just a little slow down. So if you could either give your first and last name or pause a little bit, so we're not just speeding around there, that would be great. And before we do that, I'd ask anyone who's here for the first time or back after a while and doesn't know the format. So if the regulars could take note of those people and make them feel welcome afterwards. And after our speaker, we'll have announcements and there'll be refreshments afterwards for about a half hour and socializing. So with that, let's start going around with our names. My name is Chris Shelton.
I'm Peter.
My name is Andre.
Ed. Drew.
Bob Hamilton.
Greg Rodehouse, my first time.
Michael.
George.
Ricardo.
My name is Peter.
John Wessel.
Jay Schmaltz.
My name is Philip.
Mark Tilley.
My name is Rich.
I am Tom.
Max.
Jim Bucher.
My name is Peter.
My name is Harley. I'm Jack.
My name is Howard.
My name is Steve.
Peter.
Esmeralda.
Buffalo.
Monia. My name is Tom Bruein.
Tomas Phillips.
David Axel. I'm Bob McMullen.
Hardy Clinton. Evan. Richard Azzolini. John Mitsui.
My name is Lee. My name is George.
I'm Richard. My name is Dan Mohan.
My name is Bill.
Marvin Snow.
My name is Howard Deport. Paul Hubbard.
My name is Michael.
My name is Gary.
I'm Dexter.
My name is Jim Pearson.
My name is Tony Pasqua.
My name is Jay Corbett.
Is that everybody?
I'm Kaleo.
Okay, Jim Wiggers. Well, with that, I'll introduce our speaker, who many of you will already know is Larry Yang. He is a Spirit Rock Community Dharma leader and leads meditation retreats tailored for men, people of color, and the LGBTIQ communities. He's also a facilitator of the East Bay Meditation Group Community. What's this? C or G?
C
Community Center. As well as working with people in recovery for addiction. He co-leads a meditation group for the LGBTQ community in San Francisco and is a psychotherapist and a consultant in cultural competency. So with that, please welcome Larry Yang.
Thank you for having me back. It's always really a pleasure to be in this space. It's held so much of our community for 15, maybe even 20 years. I don't even know the exact date that it started. So I have always appreciated this space for our community and our practice. So I changed the topic of my talk at the last minute. Relatively at the last minute. Howard and I were going back and forth around what I was going to talk about, and I gave him a different title last week. And so the title that I have right now is The Courage to Live, because for my own practice, I've been really exploring this practice of forgiveness in the larger context also of part of the practice of renunciation, which is letting go. So that's what I'd like to talk about tonight. And can everybody hear me? Is that okay?
Speak up just a little bit, Larry.
Okay, I'll try. Let me know if I start to fade. And I think that sometimes I know that I shy away from this practice of forgiveness because there is often this fear that comes up about doing something that is really unpleasant or challenges me. And so really to bring our mindfulness and our compassion practice towards the areas in our lives that are not just the pleasant, but also that have the fears, and really they often say that the opposite of loving kindness, that far enemy, can be fear. So as we bring this aspect of gentleness towards where we feel most challenged, that's actually one of the antidotes of the experience. And I just want to talk about the language of forgiveness, because for me, as I started looking into it, it's actually quite subtle. And we often apologize for something if we've made a mistake, or crossed a boundary with someone. And I actually feel that the words "I apologize" is slightly different than "I ask you for forgiveness." Even though conceptually it might mean the same thing, there's a different valence to the experience because it actually begins to involve the other person. And so I think for me, as I started to explore it, it became really this component of this relational aspect of how we begin to feel. It's not just, I have the power to apologize to you. It's that I'm actually asking for something that I don't actually have control over, is whether you actually give me that forgiveness or not. Suzuki Roshi says, I don't pay attention to whether you're actually following the precepts or not. I just look at how you are with each other. And this is the where forgiveness invites us into, in terms of how are we with each other in this life that inevitably has the 10,000 joys and the 10,000 sorrows. So, also to sort of begin to explore a little bit in more detail, because when we talk about forgiveness, sometimes we can also be talking about redemption or pardoning or excusing, and really forgiveness is not about those aspects. It's not about absolving or excusing or sometimes they say forgive and forget. So it's not about forgetting. Because all of those ideas are basically around the act that harmed. It's about the event that had occurred. And what forgiveness, especially when I say I ask you for forgiveness, is really inviting us into is the relational aspect between you and that other person, as opposed to the act itself. So forgiving is about my intention towards the person that harmed me, not necessarily the act itself. The act actually needs some restoration, may need some reparation, may need some kind of restorative process. But in that process, can I not forget that I'm also dealing with another human being, which I think we often forget. Dr. Martin Luther King said, forgiveness does not mean ignoring what has been done or putting a false label on an evil act. It means, rather, that the evil act no longer remains a barrier to the relationship. So one of the things that the Buddha suggested, especially when we're in a contracted state, or he actually used this example when we're angry at someone, is to give them a gift. And it's not a requirement that you feel good about giving the gift, but the gift itself is the invitation to see what will change that relationship. Does it change that relationship? So the first time I actually applied that teaching was, some of you know that my husband Stephen was married for 28 years, and he got this very messy divorce before I met him, and there are still tensions in that relationship, and they have 2 grown children that they've raised and that are in our lives, and his relationship with his ex-spouse was hard and painful, and there was a lot of resentment, I think, on both parts. And we knew that it would only get more difficult because both children were going to get married. We would have to have these family gatherings together. It was not, we were not looking forward to any of that. And one time when we were on vacation, before these weddings occurred, we turned to each other, and it was almost simultaneous, because we were going through, how are we going to deal with these family gatherings with this tension. And we were on vacation, and we said, I think we need to buy them a gift. And so it was right about at Christmas time, and so we sent Stephen's ex-wife a Christmas gift, and we never actually heard anything about the gift itself. We never got a thank you. We never got, there's that Shambhala instruction of don't expect applause. Well, we didn't get any. And that was okay. And that was okay. Because what that gift did was, it wasn't a gift to Barbara so much as it was a gift to us to begin to shift our own relationship in this dynamic. And it didn't solve, a lot of the issues, but it made it easier for us to walk through them. Ajahn Jimnian, who is one of the Thai teachers that comes to the Spirit Rock, he's going to be here this year, and so I highly recommend that he teaches day-longs as well as a residential retreat. So if you have a chance to be with him, he's really a gem of these teachings that just sort of flow from these meditation masters, because they've been living them for 50 or 60 years. But he tells a story in the 90s when a lot of the Christian denominations were trying to do missionary work in Thailand. And one of the ways that they would try to convert 96% of the Thai population to Christianity was to defame the existing Buddhist monks, to basically spread things like improper relationships with women or money, anyway, just basically slander. And so I don't know if some of you have traveled in Southeast Asia, but one of the outlets of the news media is a small Volkswagen Beetle with loudspeakers that go in 4 different directions. And someone broadcasts the news going through the streets. And so in the town of Krabi, which is where Ajahn Chumnin has his monastery, there was this Volkswagen Beetle that would go around the streets slandering him, saying that he's doing all these things which he wasn't doing, and trying to discredit him, basically. And eventually, as everybody in the community goes to the temple for some reason, whether it's the Buddha's birthday or whether it's to honor the parents' passing or for a birth or a funeral, the man who was in that driving and announcing that stuff in the Volkswagen Beetle eventually showed up at the temple one day. And he made his prostrations to the Ajahn and admitted that he was the one that was doing this, and said, I was the one that did this, and it was because I was not able to find any other work to support my child who was in the hospital, and I have 4 other children, and so he sort of described the difficulties of his life, and that there was no other means of him getting a livelihood. And Ajahn Chumnin, without skipping a beat, said, you do what you need to in order to support your family. You continue to do what you need to, even if it's doing what you are doing right now. That's fine with me. There was this automatic forgiveness for any harm that has been caused. And eventually, the man ordained, because in the Thai tradition you can ordain at any point in your life for any amount of time. So this man eventually ordained with him. And it reminds me of that story of Angulimala, who was the man that in the Buddha's time that killed 999 people, and the Buddha basically said, stop. And he said, what are you talking about? And it's basically stopping harming. And Angulimala eventually ordained with the Buddha and became fully awake. So whenever we're in relationship with someone, the invitation of forgiveness arises. And I know that some of you are in relationship with families, with partners. There is no relationship that doesn't have this invitation. Yesterday was Valentine's Day, so I was spending time with Stephen, and even in that dedicated time of being together, there was stuff that came up that I just noticed around, should I go there or should I let this go? And there is no relationship in which we are never hurt. And so this ability to look at what forgiveness is in our lives can actually create ease. And this also goes to the extreme of the relationships that we don't even really think about. So this is a story that I don't know, I found it surprising, but it's about Hillary Clinton, actually. And until I read this article in The Atlantic, I didn't realize that there are actually prayer groups in Congress. You would never think it. But there are. And so in one of in these prayer groups, usually, it's consistent with my stereotype, that most of the participants are relatively conservative, Republican people like Brownback some of these people actually were re-elected, but this was in 2001. And the article says that in 2001, just after the new class of senators was sworn in, another name was added to the list of this prayer group, Hillary Rodham Clinton. One spring Wednesday, a few months into the term, Senator Sam Brownback's turn came to lead the group, and he rose intending to talk about a recent cancer scare. But as they stood before his colleagues, Brownback spotted Clinton and was overcome with the impulse to change the subject of his testimony. I came here today prepared to share about this experience in my life that had caused great suffering, the result of which has deepened my faith, Brownback said, according to someone who was watching the scene. But I'm overcome now with only one thought. He confessed to having hatred for Clinton and having said derogatory things about her. He then turned to her and asked, Mrs. Clinton, will you forgive me? Clinton replied that she would and that she appreciated the apology. One of the members of the prayer group said it was an extraordinary moment. This fostered an unlikely relationship that yielded political bounty. Clinton and Brownback went on to co-sponsor one measure protecting refugees fleeing from sexual abuse, and another to study the effects on children of violent video games and television shows. Brownback said, that morning helped make our working relationship. It brought me closer to someone I did not ever imagine I would have a relationship with. So some of the traditional practice of forgiveness is actually giving it in three directions. And in my own practice, I've actually added a fourth. So the traditional directions are forgiving oneself for the harm that we have caused to ourselves, for asking for forgiveness from others for those who we have caused harm to. And then the third direction is forgiving others for the harm that has been done to us. And the fourth that I've incorporated into my practice is really forgiving the suffering that arises in this life. That there are sorrows that we and experiences of what we call dukkha that are out of our control and out of any one's particular origin. And can I have ease with that as well? So I just wanted to talk about those four different directions a little bit. So this aspect of forgiving self is often really difficult because we're our own harshest critic. And not only does the judgment arise, but we can even judge the judgment. And so even when, we're focused on the breath and the mind goes off, which it inevitably does, what happens? Can we simply bring the awareness back to the sensations of the breath or the body? Or is there even a subtle thought of, oh, this is not what I should be doing. I wish that my mind was more concentrated. Or I'm such a bad meditator. Everybody else is doing it better than me. And so even if that judgment arises, can we direct the kindness to the judgment itself so that we're not actually feeding the judgment by judging it? And we often, that's just a template for our everyday experience, because how often do we actually get angry at the anger, either at someone else or ourselves, or that we feed the depression by getting even more depressed, as opposed to just meeting that experience, even though it's an unpleasant one, with this aspect of awareness, which is really the kindness and the allowing that the practice is inviting us to. When I was one of these temporarily ordained monks in Thailand, many of you know the 5 precepts that we sort of invoke on day-long retreats or residential retreats. Well, if you're living in a monastic container with robes, you hold 227 precepts. And it's not like you study them and then you ordain. You ordain and then you keep them, which is literally impossible, right? Because there's just no way that you can know all of them or remember all of them. So I was breaking precepts every single day, which is a huge learning place, because I remember one particular one in which I didn't realize that as a monk, you're not supposed to drink standing up, because the whole Vinaya, or the monastic code, is a formalization of grace, living with grace, living with ease, and so everything that is, even the details of the Vinaya, is creating that grace. At least that's my understanding of the intention. And so when you're having a glass and you're standing, you have nowhere to put it. But if you're sitting down, that there's a grace to when you're supposed to eat, when you're supposed to drink, and so anyway, I didn't really realize those minor precepts. And so I was getting corrected every day. You should need to do this, need to do that. No judgment by anyone except me. And then I began to have this experiential, visceral feeling of, oh, okay, this is what it's like not to be judged. No one else was doing it except me. And then there was beginning this relaxation into this place of allowing the mistakes to happen. And just learning from them. Because we actually don't learn from anything we already know. Right? We learn from that unknown place, and that place that we actually make mistakes. Part of what helps in forgiving ourselves is recognizing our own merit. Recognizing how good we really are. And the Buddha said, this life that we have been born into is so precious, this life as a human being. He didn't say being born into a heterosexual life is so precious. He didn't say being born into a life as a man is so precious. He didn't say being born into a life that doesn't have anger is so precious. He said being born into this whole life as a human being is precious. There is a validation of our inherent goodness.
A little louder, please.
Sure, I will try. And the reason it's so precious to be born into this human life is that only on this life plane do we have the capacity to awaken. That is what makes this life so precious. In the hell realms, there's just too much suffering. In the heaven realms, you're seduced by all of the comforts and ease. It is only in this life with the 10,000 joys of which each of us go through. None of us are exempt from, even though we would like the sorrows to be over there. but it's actually the both and, the joys and the sorrows that allow us to gain the clarity to awaken. So the second direction of forgiveness is asking for forgiveness from others for harm that we may have caused. It's really acknowledging these sorrows, these imperfections of our lives, not turning away from. It's really a mindfulness practice, because the mindfulness there is nothing that is not capable of our awareness. And so one of the reasons we start with ourselves first is that often it's easier, when we are able to forgive ourselves, it's easier for us to ask for forgiveness from others. And it's this vulnerability, right? It's this vulnerability of letting go of the perfection that we would like to be and living into sort of this messiness, which is what organic life is. And again, there's sometimes this fear of vulnerability, and one of the things that Sylvia Boorstein says that I love is about vulnerability in this world is, well, what if everyone in the world were too vulnerable? What would the world be like if we were all too vulnerable? And I love that invitation into that possibility. And again, I just wanted to link it back to the awareness practice, because the Satipatthana Sutta, which is basically the invitations of awareness, has this passage contemplating the noble ones, meaning us, those who are on this path towards freedom, abide contemplating internally. They abide contemplating externally, and they abide contemplating both internally and externally. This is really so what it's saying, at least to me, is that this meditation practice, this awareness practice, is not just about focusing on our internal sensations and noticing what's arising in my own experience for my own personal awakening. It's also noticing how the actions that I do in the world impact people around me, impact the world around me. It's both noticing the intention and the impact. And when that impact is harmful, to really bring the awareness to it. Again, not to judge it, but to learn from it. So this is the way that we learn and get that feedback mechanism to actually awaken, to become more and more awake in the world. And it's easier, I think, the more frequently we do it. In the beginning, it may feel like very intimidating to ask someone for forgiveness. So I was at the end of my ordination, I went to Cambodia to do a pilgrimage to Angkor Wat, which is in Cambodia, and it's impossible to see those ruins if you've been there without a driver and a guide, which over there it's not that expensive, but it's very helpful. And so I hired a driver for 2 days. And the thing that I will remember most about the driver is at the end of each day, he said to me, and if I have done anything to offend you, may I ask for your forgiveness. Just as an automatic, it was part of, I'm sure, what he did with everyone that he was, employed with. And so there was an ease of this asking for forgiveness that was part of the cultural conditioning, part of his personal conditioning. And so this is, as we begin to recondition our hearts and our minds, it actually becomes easier. So the third direction is sometimes, actually, I in the beginning of looking at forgiveness practice, I thought that one of these directions was more difficult than the others, but actually they're all difficult. And so forgiving others for the harm that has been caused, just noticing, first of all, where forgiveness is not possible. Where is it just challenging? And again, not to judge what is arising, but simply to notice it. Be kind and gentle to that experience. Otherwise, you're actually feeding that contraction. The hardness of the situation is beginning to harden you as well. But if you simply meet that experience with kindness, you begin to dissolve the hardness. So there's that famous story, which some of you may have heard, about the two prisoners of war that got released at the end of the war, and they meet 20 years later, and one of the ex-POWs asks the other one, "Have you forgiven your captors?" And the guy says, "Are you kidding? After what they did to us? No way." And so the first guy says, "So they have you in prison still, haven't they?" And there was, I just did a session of forgiveness in a class that I'm teaching at East Bay Meditation Center, and I had people write out some stories about their own experiences of forgiveness, and one person wrote this very very disclosive story about how 20 years ago she was bypassed at a job, and the reason that she was bypassed was because she was to train the person that she wanted the job for. In other words, she wanted a certain position, and they refused to give it to her because they wanted her to train that person. And she held this resentment and grudge for when the new person came, and over 6 years, she eventually worked her way into the position, but never actually let go of the grudge. And she said maybe 10 years after that, the resentment had become softer, but she still couldn't be civil to the person that actually did this to her. And then at the end of 16 years, she left the job, or she left the company. And when she wrote this, it was 20 years after the fact. And as she was writing, she began to realize that the person that was the object of her resentment probably hadn't given this any thought after the first 3 months. And that she had probably spent about 2,000 hours of time on this subject, and how imprisoned that she felt. And so the forgiving of others is actually not so much a gift that you're giving them, it's a gift that you actually give to yourself. So I just want to talk about this organicity to forgiveness, because sometimes we can get so task focused around just tell me how to do it and I'll do it. Or I just want to get there. And it's really about noticing how there's an ebb and a flow to it. That there's a life of its own. And it's really, again, simply like the meditation instructions. You get out of the way of your life and see how your life wants to get lived, as opposed to what your mind would like you to live. So you may think that it'd be great to forgive this event or person, and yet the process of forgiveness has its own unfolding. And it's like, it's like the petals of a blossom. You can't unfold it prematurely. You have to let it relax. And with each blossom, actually, there are times of the day in which it will close. Forgiveness is not any different. So, I was talking about Stephen and his ex-wife, and there were some openings, that our relationship experienced around the gift, around preparing for these family events, the weddings, and at the wedding itself, there were, the photographers completely ignored us. There was a contraction, and so there is this opening, and just to notice it, and sometimes there's a closing, because the timing is just still not there, and to be allowing of that as well, as opposed to wanting it to be something different. Because in that wanting to be something different, there's an attachment there. And that is the cause of suffering. And the reason that I have come to around this ebb and flow and why it's so complicated is because it's really not one thing we're doing. So in the Buddhist Abhidharma, which is the treatise on it's an explanation of Buddhist psychology, and whether you actually agree with it or not, it's just an example that I use, that they delineate 52 different mind states that are possible for this mind, of which 14 are unwholesome, unskillful. Things like greed, hatred, delusion, anger, you get the picture. There are some neutral states, and then there are 25 beautiful states of mind. Loving kindness, compassion, equanimity, calm. Out of these 25, 23 are required for forgiveness. This is why it's so complicated. The more that you're able to ripen these characteristics of the mind, the easier forgiveness will flow. So some of them, as I said, loving kindness, mindfulness, non-attachment, hesitation to do harm, fear to do harm, equanimity, flexibility, integrity, compassion, faith, insight. Greta Crosby says, forgiveness is more of a Western take on it. Forgiveness is one word, but not one act alone. Forgiveness is the process we live through in order to restore a relationship. Forgiveness is the process of coming back together again with another or with oneself after a separation based on wrongdoing or grievous shortcoming. Forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiving is anchoring a wrong in its own time and letting it recede into the past as we live and move into the future. So Jack Kornfield at Spirit Rock says that forgiveness is letting go of all hope of a better past. So that we can actually live Because when we hang on to anything, when we are attached to anything, there is suffering. And so the last aspect of forgiveness that I want to go to is really this aspect of letting go. Because it's a preparation of the big let go, right? Where we have to let go of everything. So even though sometimes these relationships or these hurts feel like a huge thing in our life, it's actually smaller than that point we get to in our lives, that we have to let everything go when we start making the transition from this world. And often Buddhist practice is described as a practice of dying well. And how do we do that? How do we have this grace in letting go, in being able to forgive that experience of the First Noble Truth, that there is suffering in this world? That, of course, if we were to design the world, we would not design it this way. With the racism or the sexism or the homophobia or the transphobia, we wouldn't create a world like this. And yet, this is the world that we live in. And in the middle of that, is there still openness of our hearts and minds? Maurice Schwartz, who died of Lou Gehrig's disease, he's an educator, but he is also this great Jewish humorist, says, forgive yourself before you die, and then forgive others. Dying is only one thing to be sad over. Living unhappily is something else. Sometimes when we're caught in that First Noble Truth of suffering, when we're caught in the middle of some harm that we've experienced, that suffering will ask, why me? Why is this happening to me? Why is life unfair to me? The aspect of forgiveness invites the question, who else? Who else can actually live this life of 10,000 joys and 10,000 sorrows? When I was a teenager, when I was growing up, I was living in Philadelphia, and in the mid-50s, when I was born, my parents could not find housing in Philadelphia because they would not rent or sell property to Asian families at the time. So we had to, move outside of the city. So there was a lot of this aspect of racism, and I said to myself when I was in my mid-teens that if it's this difficult to be a person of color, I am never going to be gay. And you can just feel that closet door close and get bolted several times. And it took several decades to reopen that for me. And things changed. And life began to unfold, and I started getting out of the way of this life that I thought I should be living. And regardless of that adversity or that suffering that I just described around this oppression, I really don't think that I would be here today doing the things that I'm doing without having gone through all of that, all of those sorrows, all of that joy. And, our stories are different, but each of us have navigated that experience of the 10,000 joys and the 10,000 sorrows. Each of us, out of adversity, has created a beautiful life. Just recognizing the goodness and the merit of your own experience. And that beauty in the middle of adversity has another name. And that name is freedom. So thank you for your attention. I know that I've gone a little over, but
I'm sure we have time for questions and answers if you're free.
afterwards, yeah.
So we did go over that, so we can do the questions and answers after we depart from here. But I'm just about to ask if there are any announcements. Yes.
Excuse me. Last weekend, somebody left mistakenly with my shoes, and I think I have theirs, and it's been an interesting experience. I
hope you walk the mile.
Does anybody here? My shoes have an NB on them, and if that resonates with anybody, it would be nice to compare experiences. Well, the exchange issues doesn't need to take place. We could just compare experiences, and we're happier now than we were before.
You whispered toward the end. I didn't hear the last word you said.
Freedom.
Thank you. What's the word again?
Freedom.
Freedom.
Yeah, Larry, thank you very much. It's a privilege, honor to always have you with us here this day. Next week, we will be graced by the privilege of our own wisdom, having an open discussion. We break up into small groups and work our practice together for next Sunday.
I had two events that I wanted to share. I think one of them has been announced on the listserv or the email list before, and that's the Gay, Bi, Trans Men's Retreat that's happening in Seattle, the 3rd through the 8th of April. So it's actually a very sweet retreat, about 25 guys, and it's in a really nice place. It's a 5-day retreat in Seattle. It's been happening for 3 or 4 years now. And then the next event is, how many of you have been to Tassajara? So there's going to be a queer weekend in Tassajara from July 9th through the 12th. And I'm going to be leading it with Fu Schroeder from Green Gulch. And it promises to be really sort of awareness in the hot tubs. So you are welcome. And registration, for the first time, the registration is going to be online, and it opens on the 17th, so this week. And I think it will fill up. That's why I'm just announcing it.
Any other announcements? Okay, is there a host today?
There is a host today. My name is Bill. I'm your host today, and to let you know, there's some refreshments just outside here. There's coffee cake, there's cookies, and there's some fruit. Thank you, Marvin, for helping out bring some of that. There's also tea, and so if you have some tea, please make sure to wash out your cup before you leave. I'll be coming around with a Donna bowl, and as you probably know, your contributions are really important because they help fund our expenses. So please contribute. The suggested donation is $5 to $8. There's a directory that if you're not already on it, you can enter name and contact information to the directory. There's a sign-up sheet just outside here. And also, if you'd like to receive our newsletter by mail or by email, there's a place where you can sign up for that as well. And lastly, A group often gets together for lunch informally, and if you'd like to join in on that, just present yourself by the front door at 12:30.
Thank you, Joe. No other announcements? Let's stand in a circle and give our
By the power and truth of this practice, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all be free from sorrow and the causes of sorrow. May all never be separated from the sacred happiness which is without sorrow, and may all live in equanimity without too much attachment or too much aversion, and live believing in the equality of all that lives.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.